All right. So thank you all for everyone who already put some questions into the chat. I think we're all set to get started. I'm so grateful for everyone who's come out today to participate in our first Path to Parenthood class of the summer. And we are so grateful to have River back with us from Be Intentional Financial. And they're such an expert on this topic and really excited to pass it off to them and have them share some of their knowledge with you this evening.
Thanks, Phoebe, and thanks, Philadelphia Family Pride, for having me again. I am pumped to be here. So I'm going to share my slides and start talking, but please use the chat to ask me questions throughout. I will get to them as they make sense to get to, and feel free to repeat yourself at the end if I didn't get to you yet, but generally I can teach and adjust in real time as the questions are coming in. And I will do my best to help everybody with what I can in this hour. So getting myself set up here. First, I'll tell you a bit about me. My name is River Nice. My pronouns are they, them. I am a financial planner with an emphasis on the queer and trans community. I want to tell you a bit about my personal finance philosophy so that you know where I'm coming from when I teach things. Got to acknowledge that capitalism is actively harming us all the time, that capitalism is oppression. Got to acknowledge that coming with that, lots of people have a lot of shame around money. I hear from people who have shame around not having enough money and people who have shame around having too much money. And either way, it is the 1% hurting us and capitalism setting up a system in which we all feel bad and want to spend more. So let's acknowledge that. I do try to avoid rule of thumb numbers. I know the whole internet is going to tell you that you should have 6 months worth of expenses in your emergency fund and that 30% of your income should go towards rent. But I find that to not be helpful enough because we all are in different financial situations with different priorities. And especially here in the US, where you live has a big influence on your financial situation, and what identities you live with has a big influence on your financial situation. So rules of thumb I find are not specific enough, not helpful enough. And I did name my company Be Intentional Financial because my number one thing that I want you to take from interacting with me is to be as intentional as you can with your money, because that lets you be more intentional about the life that you're living. I'm going to take just half a second. Yep, those are good questions. I will get to as many of them as I can. So what we're going to do today is first review the range of costs of different family building strategies. Obviously, it varies depending on, like, even within each type, costs can vary, and we'll talk about ways to get the costs down. Then we'll talk about how to set a savings goal and work towards it and figure out what a realistic timeline is, which will also kind of let you know whether your savings goal is realistic for you. And then at the end, I'm going to cover some important financial considerations for once you have your kids, things like life insurance and planning for college and stuff. So first, cost ranges. So this is a question in the chat, and this is where we need to start from, is just how much does any of this cost? Starting from lowest cost, adopting a child from foster care, and this is only for kids who don't have any family to reunite with, because when you're fostering kids who have families, the goal is to reunite them with those families. But for kids who have no family to reunite with and are therefore having the goal of adoption, it's the least expensive way to add people to your family. Then domestic adoption starts to get expensive. So a range from like 20 to 40,000. Then international adoption can get up to 70,000, depending on where, of course. Then DIY pregnancy is on the lower cost end. With anonymous donor sperm, you could be looking at paying at somewhere between $300 to $1,500 per vial of sperm. For a DIY pregnancy with known sperm, where like you have a donor that you know, it could be 25 bucks, you know, could be 300 bucks, just kind of depends on your agreement. For intrauterine insemination, we could be looking at somewhere between 250 bucks to $4,000, depending on how many rounds it takes and how much support you need. Then we get into IVF, which stands for in vitro fertilization. This is where the fertilization of the egg happens outside the body and then the egg is put inside the body. So if the egg creator and the pregnancy carrier are the same person, we're looking at a range of like 12 to 25,000. And if we're looking at sometimes called reciprocal IVF, where egg donor is one person, but then the pregnancy carrier is a different person, we could be looking at 15 to 25. This should really say 25. So probably a little bit more expensive than if it was just one person doing the things. Then if we are looking at a gestational carrier, so we have an egg donor, but we need someone to carry the fetus, then we could be looking at somewhere between 60 to 150,000. If we're looking at a surrogacy where the person provides the egg and the uterus, this, I can't even predict this. It really depends on the person and the agreement that you have. In any situation, and other sessions from Philadelphia Pride, Family Pride will talk about this, but in any situation where someone is not genetically related to the child, it is always recommended to establish legal parentage by doing what's called a confirmation adoption or second parent adoption. And that could be anywhere from $100 to $3,000 as a rough range, but I believe lawyers are doing sessions with y'all, so they might have a better idea of what costs from them. And then if you're looking at freezing eggs to provide more options in the future, there's a range of fees for the actual cost of getting the eggs out and frozen, and then you have to pay storage fees. And then same with freezing sperm, usually cheaper to get the sperm to be frozen in the first place, but then you still got to pay for storage. Before I jump in, checking for questions. What are you paying for in a known sperm donor situation? So I came up with these ranges based on other people's expertise. So I would guess like the actual process of getting the sperm into the body, which depending on your relationship and your situation could be free, or could be a turkey baster, or it could be other medical necessities. So it just depends on what methods you're using. I do know that when you're getting sperm from like a sperm bank, sometimes the sperm is washed so that only the like strongest swimmers are available. So a higher chance of pregnancy. So that might be an option on the table, even if you know who the sperm donor is. You might be wanting to look into something like that to increase the chances of pregnancy. Thanks, Phoebe, for dropping the link to the legal session in this program for the summer. Great. Okay. Yeah, like Stephanie said, sometimes people have their known donors' sperm frozen, especially if you want multiple kids to have the same genetics, then you might want to freeze some sperm even while you use some sperm, just to make sure that that option remains on the table. Lauren, I don't know, but the lawyers would be able to answer that. I'm sorry, off the top of my head, I don't. The question was, for people watching the video, was, do you know what the legal cost of a sperm donor signing away parental rights would be? I think it kind of goes along with any kind of parent confirmation cost. I don't know, the lawyers know. So I'm going to move on to how to reduce costs, and I'm going to start with adoption and then move into pregnancy options. So when it comes to adoption, there are grants out there that are specific to infertility, grants out there that are specific to LGBTQ folks, and grants out there that are specific to active duty military and veterans. So here are a couple of links. Can I just drop the links for y'all? Family Equality and helpusadopt.org. Thank you, Alana and Theo, for your legal info. So those are places where you can start to look for grants. This first list from Family Equality has them broken down by these situations. So there's not just adoption grants, there's also fertility preservation grants if you're going to lose your fertility because of health concerns or maybe even trans hormone replacement therapy. So you can look for this stuff. And then helpusadopt.org has grants specifically just for adoption. So those are some resources to start looking through to see if you can get any of the costs covered. Then I'm going to get into pregnancy. And so because this can look a lot of different ways, there's a lot of different stuff to discuss here. So first step is to always talk to your health insurance provider. And if you have the option to choose between multiple health insurance policies, ask each of them. So maybe your job offers multiple plans, and every open enrollment you get to decide which plan. Maybe your spouse has health insurance through their job and you also have health insurance through your job. So it is worth asking all of the policies that you have access to what they cover, so that next open enrollment, you can choose the one that's going to be the most useful, or, whatever open enrollment before you're attempting pregnancy. You can choose the health insurance option that's most useful, even if it is more expensive. So I wanted to lay out some questions for you to specifically ask when you call. I know it can be nerve-wracking to call health insurance providers. So feel free to screenshot this, and I'm also happy to make the slides available later, since I have lots of links and specific recommendations in here. But some of the questions, you can generally start with what is covered in terms of fertility treatment. Is anything specifically excluded? But then more specifically, it is helpful to know, does the insurance cover initial consultations with fertility centers? Do they cut you off after you've talked to 2 or 3 of them? Does the policy cover diagnostic testing? Are medications covered, or just the cost of working with the doctors? Do the medications need to be from a specific location? Do they cover both IUI and IVF? Do you have to try IUI before they will cover IVF? And is there a cap, of course, on fertility specific coverage? And does that cap look like a dollar amount per year, or a number of tries, or is there any kind of lifetime limit that we need to worry about hitting? So when you are on the phone and asking these questions, make sure you document that. Like, don't just try to remember it in your head. Don't try to argue with somebody without having things written down. So as you're on the phone, like, type up or write up what you're saying, and include, definitely get the name of the person you're talking to, so that if you need to fight with health insurance later, you know who it was. Don't hesitate to ask for somebody higher up. Don't hesitate to ask more questions or keep pushing. If somebody sounds uncertain, ask to talk to somebody else. This is your life and your family. So don't let politeness get in the way of getting the information that you need from the health insurance companies. Any suggestions when you've asked some or all of these questions and yet the insurance still can't give you any answers? I am so sorry. This country is very frustrating to live in for a lot of the time. If you can keep pushing to talk to someone higher up, if you can start threatening that you're going to cause a problem for them, if you have access to other health insurance options that you could switch to over the next year, and then if you really can't get any answers from them, then you might have to start planning for them to not cover anything, because that's just, unfortunately, the reality of living in the US. Yeah, Alana says contact them in writing might be more helpful than phone. So yeah, definitely try multiple communication methods. Ask for a meeting in person even. I mean, I know it's COVID, so that's to your preference, but my trans friends and clients who have had to fight insurance companies over trans coverage have really benefited from asking for an in-person meeting and appeal, and really arguing, showing up to that meeting with multiple people to show that it's not just you who's going to give them a problem. It's your entire chosen family that's going to give them a problem if they don't give you answers. If you are someone who faces systemic discrimination from healthcare situations, like people of color, Black people and Indigenous people specifically, fat people, people with disabilities, ask for a meeting and show up with your most privileged friends, and see if that makes them be a little more helpful. Unfortunate that we have to do this, but use whatever you got at your disposal. I have a question. Is a diagnosis of infertility being 2 men trying to have a child from family equality link? I'm not sure, honestly. Whoever is providing that grant is going to have their definition of what counts as a diagnosis of infertility. But you can try, can't hurt to apply, can't hurt to ask. But everybody's going to have their own definition of what counts as not having fertility. Cool. Okay. Once you have figured out what's going on with your health insurance, or unfortunately given up on them entirely, you can look into ways to get sperm. So if you don't have someone in your life that you want to be your sperm donor, then you can look at places like the Known Donor Registry. The FDA has a whole database of sperm banks and fertility centers. So that will give you options. I believe you can search by zip code also. And then I noticed that the Sperm Bank of California specifically has a lot of information and resources in their resources section. So whether you get sperm from California and have it delivered to Philly, or whether you just use their resources to get more information, their website is pretty helpful. So that's a place to look. Scrolling through my questions super quick. Option. Yep, great. Okay. Now, when you're going through intrauterine insemination or in vitro fertilization, there are ways to reduce the costs for those procedures and medications. First, I would suggest looking for grants. And again, some of one of the grant links I already dropped will have some options, but this Baby Quest Foundation also has options. Yeah, I'll definitely get the slides out to y'all. That's not a problem. The Baby Quest Foundation has grants for fertility and IVF stuff. When you are looking at different fertility centers to go to, you can compare them against each other and negotiate with them and try to pit them against each other, just like you would any other service provider, and say, well, this one's going to give me a better deal, but I'd really love to go with you if we can figure it out. It's worth a try, right? This is trying to make capitalism work for us by using the competition that's supposed to work to keep costs low. And then when it comes to the costs of your medicine, the IVF process involves a lot of medication and it can get expensive. So instead of just doing whatever they are telling you have to do or paying for whatever they tell you have to pay, you can ask your pharmacy, ask your fertility center, ask local hospitals for free or lower cost medicine. I've heard of folks having success just straight up asking the fertility center if they have any leftover medicine from past patients that would still be good, and that can work. You can also look for coupons for medication. GoodRx is an app that has coupons for all different types of medications. I know trans folks who use it to get their testosterone way cheaper than even going through insurance would be. There might also be manufacturer coupons out there. So when you get your prescriptions, like find out the names of all the different medications and the names of the companies that make them and see if you can get discounts from the manufacturers. You can also look at consumer savings programs that get the cost of medication in general down for you. Oh, thanks, Phoebe, for dropping the link for the session on choosing a sperm donor. That's really helpful. And then when it comes to IUI and IVF and anything about pregnancy, like if anything where pregnancy costs money, trying to become pregnant as quickly as possible, reducing the number of times you need to go through an insemination process is going to help keep costs low and keep your emotions working for you. So I received the recommendation for the book, It Starts with the Egg, so that you can learn more about what is actually happening in your body and how to maximize your chances of the pregnancy taking the first time. I also wanted to talk about shared risk programs. This is something that I forgot to mention last time I taught this workshop. So there are programs out there that will offer you a flat fee if you qualify. And this is basically guaranteeing pregnancy or your money back. So if you are worried that it might take you several rounds to become pregnant, then this could be a way to mitigate some of that risk, the financial risk of needing multiple rounds. They are going to decide whether you qualify for the program based on your health statuses and your age. And then the downside of these is that it is usually more expensive than just one round of IVF on your own. So if you pay for this and then you do get pregnant right away, you might have wasted some money that you didn't need to. But it's hard to know that up front. So some people really like the comfort of knowing that this is how much they're going to end up paying, even if it takes 5 or 6 tries to get pregnant. So you can look into shared risk programs. If you need to get costs down further, you could look into options to participate in research or to donate eggs or embryos in exchange for the medical services. So, I didn't mean to actually open the link, but I'll drop the links for y'all if you want to look into options there. Going to take a little bit of research to find programs that are worthwhile for you, but it can be helpful if you need to get costs down. Okay. So that was what I had written down about the costs of having kids and ways to reduce those costs besides like saving up for it yourself. I'm going to scroll through my questions really quick and feel free to keep putting your questions in the chat. Yeah, I saw a question about taking out a personal loan, so I will talk about that. Alana and Theo remind me if I don't, but I plan to talk about that. Cost. How much does it cost to actually raise a child? We'll come to that in the next section once you have the kids. How much should finances impact the choices you make in queer family planning? That's a great question. Obviously, the answer is personal to you. How much should finances impact the choices that you make in queer family planning? So as a financial planner, I talk a lot about having multiple goals for your life, right? Like we all have multiple goals that cost money for our lives. So for some folks, that's like buying a house and having kids and retiring. For some folks, that's like gender affirming stuff, travel, hobbies, starting a business, like lots of things. So I think if you're trying to decide your options for family planning and how that fits into your overall financial picture and goals, I think you and whoever else you are planning a life or planning parenthood with needs to kind of sit down and write down all of the goals that you have for your life and then kind of rank how important they are to you. So if it is more important to you to retire at 60 in a queer commune than it is to have a child that you gave birth to, then you get to make that choice. And you get to say, well, maybe it's worth paying for 2 rounds of IVF. And then I know that I'll still be able to afford the queer commune. Like, it's kind of just about balancing what your priorities are and deciding like, well, if we have to pay for all of these family planning needs, then it's going to take us an extra 5 years to buy a house. And am I okay with that or not? Do I want to make sure that I own a house first before trying to have kids so that I have that type of stability for my family? Like, it's just about figuring out what your priorities are and being honest with yourself and with the other people in your life about what your priorities actually are. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, cool. So I'm going to talk more about financial planning to save up for a goal. First is to figure out what the goal is, right? So I just gave you those ranges and we talked about different ways of having kids. So maybe come up with a plan A and a plan B and start to talk about at what point are we going to switch from plan A to plan B. There's obviously the financial component, but there's also such an emotional component of going through trying to get pregnant or trying to find your adoption match. Or whatever else it is. So that's something to get really honest about with yourself and your partner and talk to other families. You know, Philadelphia Family Pride has been amazing in offering sessions about how to plan parenthood and sessions to connect with other queer parents and prospective parents. So use those resources to figure out what your goals are and what your priorities are. Then think about what does each cost. So I gave you the ranges of what all the different options cost, but obviously it's going to be specific to your situation, what you're looking for, where you are, what is available to you. So maybe spend a couple of hours doing some research on where you could go for your plan A, what adoption agencies are in your location, what fertility centers are nearby, and start to come up with a more specific idea of how much each plan is going to cost before you get help. Then you're going to figure out what resources you have available. So health insurance comes first and see what they will actually help you with and what they won't. And like I said, see what other health insurance plans are available to you. If the health insurance plan offered by your job is really garbage and not helpful, you could look at buying health insurance through the marketplace instead, which for those of us in Pennsylvania, we go through Penny to get health insurance through the marketplace. And Penny is pretty good at allowing you to compare different insurance options and have an estimate of how much it's going to cost you per month to have that health insurance plan. Then you can look into whether you have access to a health savings account, an HSA, or a flex spending account, an FSA. These are both savings accounts that save you money on income tax if you're going to use the money specifically for health-related expenses. So if your health insurance plan is a high deductible health insurance plan, then you can access an HSA and put money pre-tax into that HSA and roll over the money indefinitely until you use it. And so you're saving a little bit of money on income tax while you're saving up for medical expenses. A flex spending account is similar, but that one can be just offered through an employer, regardless of whether you have a high deductible health insurance plan or not. The downside to the flex spending account is that if you don't use the money by the end of the year, you will likely lose the money. It's a use or lose each year situation. So it might be more helpful in a year that you are taking on pregnancy than in a year that you're not. Then when you're thinking about ways to reduce costs, think about how much time you actually have for the research, for the grant applications, for negotiation, for sitting on the phone. Be honest about what's going on in your life and how much time you have for that and who is going to help you with that. And also think about whether your time is better spent reducing costs or earning more income. If you have a profession or skill set where you could make more money by taking on more work, or you could earn more money at a side hustle, that might be more worth your time than just trying to get your costs as low as possible. This is, I kind of think about like the people who do extreme couponing or the people who do extreme credit card rewards points. Like people definitely can save a lot of money doing that. But for some people, it would be a better use of their time to make more money with the hours that they spend than just reducing their costs. So that's just up to your income potential and your willingness to do research and reduce costs versus doing something to make more money. Also consider if you have any possibility of financial support from loved ones or even from your extended network. It is incredibly messed up that we have to GoFundMe to pay for like healthcare expenses in this country, but it is a thing that some people have success with if they don't have other options. Same thing with financial support from loved ones, especially if you're like queer, trans, and your parents are like cis het and have money. Like ask them, or other loved ones. Like it can't hurt to see if you can get a little bit of financial support from the people around you in creating and building your family. And then finally, we come to how much you are actually able to save and over what realistic timeline to have money to put towards this yourself. So when you are creating a budget, the first step is to figure out your expenses. And this includes your goals and building your emergency savings, because we want to make sure you're going to have some emergency savings before baby comes. And figure out your sources of income and then match your income to your expenses and see how much you are able to save. Remember when you're doing this to plan for weird stuff, no budget ever goes entirely according to plan. And remember that there are less frequent expenses than whatever you spent money on last month. Make sure your car insurance is getting paid and your annual subscriptions are being paid. So you can use tools to create your budget like spreadsheets or YNAB, which stands for You Need a Budget, which is a service online that costs something like $100 a year. Some folks really like Simplify by Quicken. Some people like Monarch Money. Some people like the Mint app. If you want to start with a free spreadsheet template, I have one on my website that you can download and use. But if you're not keeping track of a budget at all, this is a really useful tool to figure out how much you can save and what a realistic timeline is to reach your goal to pay for adoption or pregnancy or whatever it is. So to figure out your expenses, you would go back and look at them. I recommend at least 1 month, ideally 3 months of all of your credit card and bank statements. Go look at what you spent your money on. Also check where you spent money via Venmo, Cash App, PayPal, stuff like that. If you use cash on the day-to-day, like, I don't know, I don't, but some people do. Come up with roughly where do you tend to spend your cash and is that still necessary to do? Like I said, remember that you might be paying for some things annually or every 6 months, and don't forget to include those in your list of expenses. And then categorize those expenses based on what data is useful for you to have. So all the budgeting apps out there like Mint are going to have their list of categories. My budget spreadsheet template has a list of suggested categories, but ultimately you want to check what might you be able to change, what is really a high priority, what is really a low priority, and therefore what do you not want to change versus what you do want to change. And like that ultimately is going to lead you to how much you're actually able to save. Some quick tips to try to save more money. First, notice if you're paying for things that you don't need or use. The subscription model has been really out to get us the last couple of years. So check that you're paying for only subscriptions that you actually want. Notice if you're paying for anything expensive when a cheaper thing would be fine. Like if you want to be able to go out to eat for date night, does it have to be the nicest restaurant or can it be a cheaper restaurant? You can try to negotiate lower bills or switch providers to get your costs down for your bills. I've seen this to be most successful with like internet or cable bills and cell phone bills, pit Comcast and Verizon against each other. Give it a try. You could consider taking advantage of intro rates on policies or bills to try to get your costs down temporarily. And ultimately, what I want you to use the budget for is to check that your expenses are in alignment with your priorities and values. So if you are spending more per month on takeout than you are on saving for your family, is that accurate of reflection of your priorities? I'm not judging you if it is, but just that's something for you and any other people involved in the decision-making of your life that you need to talk through and agree on what is actually the priority for the next couple months or years. Once you have a budget, I recommend that you continue to use it to track what's going on so that you can keep saving as much as you want to be saving. The best way to be intentional about what you're doing is to face it. So figure out what tool works for you. Could be a spreadsheet, could be an app. I don't really care. It's just got to be something that works for you. Remember that you can modify the budget as needed. You don't have to just set it up once and use it for 10 years. Like you can update it every 3 months or so. I suggest some kind of accountability system. Maybe it's a weekly meeting with your partner. Maybe it's a monthly check-in with your best friend, but just something that holds you accountable to doing what you need to do to prioritize what you want to prioritize. You could also consider automating your savings. So once you set up the budget, if you're like, okay, I'm going to save $1,000 a month, maybe you just set up an auto transfer from your checking account to your savings account, or maybe you update direct deposit from your employer so that $1,000 of your paycheck goes directly into your savings account and you don't touch it. That's only going to work if you don't overspend and if you keep an eye on what you're spending, but is really useful for some folks. Types of accounts you can save your money into. So depending on how far out your goal is, there are different types of accounts that I would recommend for keeping that savings and either letting it stay safe or letting it grow. So if you're planning to use your money within a year, you're looking to start the adoption process or start the medical process within the next year, then I would say keep it in a savings account at a bank or credit union so that we're not risking it to the stock market, right? The stock market's going to go up and down and do what it does. And a year is not really long enough to let anything recover if things go badly. So this says FDIC insured, which means that the federal government is ensuring that you will get the money if the bank goes under, but that's any major bank and credit union will have that security in their savings accounts. So that is a good place to start. You can look for a high yield savings accounts. Interest rates have been garbage since the pandemic, but they're slowly going up now. I think Ally Bank's savings account is paying 1.15% interest now, but like at least it's not going to decrease in value, at least if you're using it within a year. Now, if your goal is definitely at least a year away, but maybe less than 5 years away, then I would recommend looking into Series I savings bonds. These are savings bonds offered by the federal government. And so a bond means you are lending money to the government entity or a corporate entity, but in this case, it's the federal government, and they are paying back that loan plus interest. And Series I savings bonds, the interest rate that the federal government pays you for loaning them money is indexed to inflation. So because inflation is super high right now, that means the interest rates on these is really high right now. Last I checked, it was over 9%. So the downside to these savings bonds is that it locks up your money for a year. You cannot get the money back for a year. And then if you do pull money out after a year, you will lose 3 months worth of interest on it, but you're still going to be earning way more interest on that than you will in a savings account. And you're not risking losing any money on this investment because it is loaning money to the federal government and they have always paid back their bonds. So that's something to look into if that is your timeline. If your goal is more than 3 years away, I know there's like some fuzziness here. So this is a decision that you have to make, and you can always talk to a financial advisor if you need to. Then we can consider actually using an investment account, a brokerage account. Kelsey asked, how does a Series I savings bond compare to high yield savings accounts? So high yield savings accounts, interest rate is around 1% or maybe 1.15% interest right now. But the advantage to the high yield savings account is you can take the money out literally whenever. There's no restrictions on that. The Series I savings bond is earning over 9% interest, so incredibly more money, but you're locking up the money for a year before you can touch it. So that's why I would recommend the savings account if you need the money within a year, or you might need the money within a year. But if you're definitely more than a year out, then the Series I savings bond is going to let it grow way faster than a high yield savings account. But if we're talking further out, then we can consider actually investing in an investment account. So you could open a brokerage account, just choose investments that are on the lower risk side. So when we're choosing how to invest, we will choose more risk if our goal is further away, because we have time to ride the stock market as it does what it does. But if the goal is not very far away, then we want to choose something not very risky so that we're just riding it up and down a little bit. And make sure that you're choosing a diversified investment. Please do not buy individual stocks. Please do not buy cryptocurrency. Those are too volatile for short-term investments. We want something diversified like a mutual fund or an ETF so that if the airline industry tanks again, we're not losing all of our money to American Airlines stock. Make sense? And then, like I just said, the level of risk should be according to the time frame for when you want to use the money. Okay, next section is things to consider once you have your kids. Before I dive into it, I'm going to scroll through my questions really quick and make sure I didn't miss any. Oh, I was going to talk about loans, Alana, sorry. So if you need to look into loans or other, like borrowing money to be able to pay for things, you can do that. You want to look at the terms of the loan available to you. Obviously, borrowing money from someone you know personally is different than borrowing money from a bank or a credit card company. But make sure you are clear on how much money you're borrowing, how much interest you're paying, and is that interest rate fixed or variable? What the repayment terms are, like how much you're going to have to pay them per month, and if that's flexible at all. And if they're going to penalize you if you repay it faster than what the plan was. So that's called a prepayment penalty. So if you have to borrow money, you want to choose the lowest interest rate possible, but I would advise you to really consider whether a fixed or variable interest rate makes sense. So a fixed interest rate means this is going to be the interest rate for the entire time until I pay this off. A variable interest rate means that it's going to change as the economy does economy things. So the variable interest rates often start out lower than the fixed rates, but interest rates all around the US are going up right now because inflation is so high and because everything's so weird as we come out of COVID. So now is not a great time for a variable interest rate. I hesitate to choose a variable interest rate ever, actually, because we don't know for sure what the economy is going to do. So I'd rather know I'm going to pay 6% forever than say, oh, I'm going to pay 5% for now, but it could be 10% later. I don't know. Look at multiple options of where you can borrow money or use a credit card and see what's going to be the lowest interest rate. And then just check that they are going to ask for a monthly payment that fits into your budget and that they are not going to penalize you for paying it off early. A bank might want to penalize you for paying it off early because they want to get the full amount of interest from you over a 10-year loan or something like that. Whereas if you pay it faster, you pay less interest in total. So that would be why they would do that. And that would be why it's a bummer for you if you have that stipulation. Does that help? Do we have more questions about loans?
That was super helpful. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Totally. I am not aware off the top of my head of any loans that are specific to family creation, but certainly like credit unions and stuff will just give you a personal loan if you can demonstrate your ability to pay it back. So just make sure your credit score is as good as it can get, because that'll get you the best interest rate. And then make sure that you have like the level of income and the budget to be able to pay it until it's gone. Okay, so considerations once you have kids. Last time I did this workshop, I did a whole session on estate planning, but Philadelphia Family Pride is going to have attorneys talk to you about estate planning. So just make sure you get information about writing an estate plan, which is a will plus other stuff. But from a financial planner perspective, I highly recommend life insurance. This is money that will pay out if you die, basically. So if you were to suddenly not be around to either make money for the family or provide labor and work for the family, then we would want there to be money to replace that. So there's two main buckets of life insurance. One is term life insurance. This is the much more affordable option. And this provides coverage for a specific time period. So you could buy a 20-year term life insurance policy. So if I bought a 20-year term life insurance policy right now, then if I die anytime in the next 20 years, the money pays out. If 20 years and a day goes by and then I die, there's no money, it's gone. So it's kind of like renting an apartment. It's there and you're paying for it while you need it. But then when you leave or the term is over, you don't get any money back. Permanent life insurance is what it sounds like. It is permanent coverage. It's gonna pay out as long as you keep paying your premium with them every month or every year. And eventually will pay out when each of us eventually passes away. Sometimes there's an investment component to that where part of the money that you're paying in gets invested so it can grow even bigger. The problem with permanent life insurance is that it is incredibly expensive. I've seen it be 15 times as expensive as term life insurance. So most of the time for most people, it doesn't make sense to pay that much for that. It makes more sense to pay for the cheaper term life insurance. And then if you still have extra money in your budget, invest that money for the future so that it's just the investment without paying extra for life insurance. So in all things insurance, the premium is what you are paying them in order to own the policy. So you're usually paying them every month or once a year, depending on what you set up when you buy it. And then the benefit amount is the amount of money that gets paid out to your beneficiary if you pass away. And the beneficiary is the person, or it can be multiple people, who gets the money if you pass away. So like I said, you want life insurance if anybody is depending on you for income or work. You would also want it if you have any debt that somebody else would be on the hook for if you were gone. I'm thinking about co-signers on private student loans, but I'm also thinking about mortgages that you're sharing with other people. But basically, if there's any debt that somebody else would be on the hook for if you were gone, then we would want to have life insurance to pay off that debt. Can also be useful to pay for end-of-life medical bills or funeral expenses, but usually the biggest one is dependents. And I'll throw a quick, plant a quick seed for you here. Dependents are not necessarily just your kids. Dependents could also be aging parents or disabled family members, like anybody who might be relying on you for money or work throughout your life. So to figure out how much you need, first, if we're thinking about term life insurance, think about how long you need the coverage for. So maybe you want a 20-year policy to get your kid to age 20. And then after that, it doesn't matter as much to them financially if you're gone. Maybe if you took out a 30-year mortgage with somebody else, you want a 30-year term life insurance policy so that if you pass away anytime that there's still money owed on the house gets paid off for whoever else lives there. Also think about what expenses would your dependents need to be covered right away. Do you want your spouse to be able to take time off of work? Do you want everybody to get therapy? Do you want to make sure that any medical needs are paid for? And then what are folks relying on you for in the long term? So costs of raising the child, costs of getting your parents through their old age, costs of getting your spouse to retirement and through retirement, that kind of stuff. And then you can compare how much the premium costs to how big the benefit is and how long the term is. So you can get it either through a job or privately. You can buy your own policy, even if you have it through work. Policy Genius is a great place to start to get multiple quotes from multiple companies and get a sense of how much it'll cost. You could also talk to a licensed insurance broker. And I said broker because I want you to talk to somebody who can get you quotes from multiple companies, not somebody who just works for one specific insurance company who's going to tell you that their product is the best product. I will say life insurance is probably more affordable than you think it is, especially term life insurance, right? I've seen healthy 30-year-old women pay something like 30 bucks a month, 20 bucks a month. So it's worth getting a quote for your situation. Life insurance is weirdly gendered in what they charge you because they are using their statistical analysis to predict how long you will live. And they've broken that down by age, health status, tobacco use, and gender. So for trans people, they're starting to catch on that we exist, but I will tell you life insurance is cheaper for women and more expensive for men. So do what you got to do to get through that. Disability insurance is an insurance policy that will pay out to replace some of your income if you are unable to earn your income due to a covered illness or disability. So there's usually a short-term disability policy, which means up to 3 months, and then a separate long-term disability policy, but make sure that you understand the details of the policy. Sometimes long-term means until retirement age, and sometimes it means for 2 years, and then you're on your own. So check that. This is different from like Social Security disability benefits. Disability insurance is a private insurance policy that you would get specifically for yourself, whereas Social Security disability is the federal government program that any of us who have had to interact with it know is a real nightmare to try to get to pay out. So the private insurance company is more likely to pay out and more likely to pay out more quickly than the government program. So you would need disability insurance if you would be totally stuck if you were unable to work, or if anyone else is relying on your income besides just you, and there wouldn't be another place to turn if you weren't able to bring in that income anymore. So in terms of how much you need, this is where the budget can be helpful again. What would your budget look like if you only had 60% of the income that you currently have? And then compare that to how much coverage you can get. So most disability insurance policies are going to pay out 60% of your usual base salary or profit if you're a business owner. So that's something to check on. Sometimes you can pay extra to get up to 75% or 90%. Very rarely have I seen it cover 100% of your usual income. So you can get disability insurance through a work benefit if you have a salary type job. And again, you can purchase it privately and get quotes from someplace like Policy Genius or an insurance broker. And when it comes to disability insurance, it's also super weirdly gendered, but in this case, the disability insurance is cheaper for men and more expensive for women because pregnancy risk is a cause of disability. So do with that what you can. I've been talking really fast, so I'm going to pause really briefly and take a sip of water and see if any questions come through in the chat before I talk more about investing. Oh, there's a question about how much does it cost to actually raise a child? That's a great question. And it does vary, obviously, right? Like there are some families who want their kids to have brand new clothes every year and go to private school and whatever. And there are some families who are like, you know, if we can take a vacation every couple of years, I'm great. So it varies. But you could start with a budget for what your life costs now, and then think through like, okay, if I needed childcare, what options are available to me in where I live and how much might that cost? You know, do a little research about that. Ask other Philadelphia Family Pride families what they pay for childcare. And then think about what schools you would want your kid to go to. Do we want just public school, so minimal expenses, or do we want some kind of like charter or private school that might cost more money? What is available in the area that you're planning to live and raise your child? You can think about the cost of, you know, diapers and baby food, and then, you know, just having like a hungry teenager in your house. So it might be useful to start with like the budget of what your life currently costs, and then have like an infant toddler budget and then like a teenager budget, and just kind of imagine breaking down those costs of like, well, if my kid needs some new clothes sometimes, I have an idea of what it costs for me to get clothes. So let me just translate that to 1 or 2 other people in the household. I know what it costs to feed myself with groceries every month. So maybe I'm going to just double that if there's more people in the house. And for any information that you don't have, like what diapers or baby formula costs, or like what stuff that you need originally, like the car seat and the stroller and whatever, that's where you can turn to the other families in your network and see what information they have and what resources you might have available to like get stuff for free or share expenses with other families. Does that help at all? Yeah, a little bit. I will say very roughly, just to give you a ballpark, you know, I said I hate rules of thumb. When I do life insurance analysis for my clients and I think through how much money do we want to get the kid to adulthood and maybe get the kid through college, I would very roughly ballpark 200 grand total to get a kid to 18 and 200 grand total again for college if you want to pay for them to go to college. So that gives you a ballpark to start from. But really, I think drafting a couple of budgets based on what you have access to in your area and your family situation is going to be more specific and helpful for that. Just checking if I missed any other questions. Okay, I think that's it so far. So investing for your kid's future. For some people, it is important to pay for their child to go to college. And for some people, it's not. That is a personal preference. I really hope the college situation in this country changes over the next decade or two, but we'll see. But I wanted you to know about a couple of types of investment accounts. So a 529 plan is an investment account that has some tax benefits that is specifically to be used for education-related expenses. What they consider to be education-related expenses is any accredited college or university in the US, any accredited trade school in the US, and even most private high schools in the US. They'll also include a couple of colleges abroad. So you can look at the list. It's I believe it's a list set by the federal government, or at least that all of the states agree to. So you should be able to find that information pretty easily. Each state in the US has their own 529 plan, but you don't have to live in that state or go to school in that state in order to use the plan. So a few years ago, all the financial advisors loved Utah's plan because the Mormons made sure it was a really good one, honestly. Lately, I've found that the Pennsylvania plan is pretty good, especially if you do live in Pennsylvania. I believe you get a little bit of an income tax break on your state taxes as well as the federal tax break. But that's something to just look through what 529 plan makes sense for you. When you set up a plan, you're going to have to name a singular person to be the beneficiary of that plan. So hypothetically, that would be the child whose college we are saving for. But if the child isn't born yet, you can name yourself or your spouse or somebody else. And then you can transfer who the beneficiary is between parent-child relationships and first cousin relationships. Maybe a couple others, double check that. But it can go both ways. So if you name your child as the beneficiary and then your child gets a full ride, you could transfer it to yourself and go get a PhD or something if that's what you want to do. And vice versa, you can name yourself and then later transfer it to your child. You can transfer between siblings, if I forgot to say that. So you could set up just one 529 in your oldest child's name and then transfer it once they've used half or whatever you want to set up. Question, do you have to transfer a 529? Not necessarily. I mean, so you can list the beneficiary, save and invest the money, and then that person uses it or doesn't use it. If they are using it for education expenses, then great. But if they use it for anything besides education, then there's just a 10% penalty on whatever money was used for something that did not count as education. So education expenses is going to be like tuition of any of the types of schools that I mentioned, books, and I think even housing, as long as it's like within the limit of what your school says it costs for a student to be housed to attend there. Does that help, Kelsey? Did I understand your question? Great, absolutely. Another option is a Roth IRA, a Roth individual retirement account. So this is actually a retirement specific investment account. You're supposed to use it for retirement, but it is a very flexible retirement investment account. So it has tax advantages. I'm not going to dig into it unless people specifically want to know because I am low on time. But the benefit to the Roth IRA is that after you've had it open for 5 years, you can withdraw the investment growth in that account. So once you start putting money in, you can withdraw up to the amount that you put in. You just can't take out any growth, but after 5 years, you can take out the growth also. So I have some clients who are using the Roth IRA and putting in the maximum $6,000 per year with the idea that they can use it for college or for their own retirement. So they have that flexibility, knowing that after 5 years, you can take the money back out without the 10% penalty. So that's just an option for you. The downside of the Roth IRA is they do limit, you can only put in up to $6 grand per year. They bump the max up if you are over age 55 or something. I don't know, that's something to check. So that's just an option that you can consider. And then of course, there's just a regular investment account, a brokerage account that has no tax benefits, but also no restrictions about how or when you use the money. So that would be fine also. Okay, I talked really fast. I got it through an hour. I do want to offer, if anybody needs help taking control of their money and wants to talk to me about whether I can help you or point you in a direction, I am happy to do a free call with you. You can schedule that at my website, just the big button in the middle that says schedule a free consultation with River. And then last thing I want to leave y'all with is a couple of other resources. So the Broken Brown Egg is a website that is Black centered, that is specifically to help with fertility issues. And then, like I said, the Sperm Bank of California has a pretty comprehensive resource list, including a really long book list if you need that. So thanks, Philadelphia Family Pride, for having me again. And thanks everybody for your questions. I'm happy to hang out for a few